The wind howled across the lonely stretch of land, carrying dust from the dry hills and the faint sound of coyotes in the distance. The sun had long gone down, leaving the world painted in deep gray and quiet. Inside the small wooden cabin, a single lamp burned low. The rancher, named Samuel Hart, sat at the edge of his rough table with a worn Bible open before him. He wasn't reading much anymore. He just liked the sound of the pages turning. They kept him company. He had lived alone for years, ever since the fever took his wife and the drought took most of his cattle. He didn't expect visitors anymore. Folks had stopped coming this far out. Then came a knock. It was soft at first, like the wind itself had learned manners. Samuel frowned. He listened again. Another knock, this time stronger, quicker, almost urgent. He stood, his boots scraping the floor. No one came to his door after sundown. Not in these parts. He took his lantern and moved toward the door. When he opened it, the wind pushed against him, cold and sharp. But the cold wasn't what froze him. It was the sight before him. 5 women stood in the dark, wrapped in old shawls and tattered blankets. Their faces were tired, their eyes shadowed by grief and dust. One of them, tall and steady, stepped forward. "We mean no harm," she said softly. "We are widows from the Apache camp near the river. We lost our homes in the storm. We have nowhere to go." Samuel looked at them for a long moment. He had heard of the camp. Many settlers kept their distance, speaking low whenever the word Apache came up. But what he saw now wasn't danger. It was hunger, fear, and something deeper. Hope, maybe, though it was faint. He didn't speak for a long time. The women stood there, heads bowed, as the wind cut through the night. "You'd better come in," he finally said. They entered one by one, moving quietly like shadows. Samuel set the lantern on the table and watched as they looked around his small cabin. There wasn't much to see. Just a bed in the corner, a stove, some tools, and a few books. He could see they were cold, their hands trembling slightly. He took a few pieces of firewood and built up the fire until the room filled with light and warmth. The women gathered near it, their faces softening as the heat reached them. The oldest among them whispered a word in her language, something that sounded like a prayer. Samuel didn't ask questions at first. He poured them warm water from the kettle and found what bread he had left. He placed it on the table. They thanked him quietly, their voices barely above a whisper. He sat back down, watching them eat carefully, almost shyly, as though they were afraid to take too much. It struck him then how long it must have been since they'd had a full meal. When they were done, the tall woman spoke again. "My name is Naya," she said. "These are my sisters, our men. They did not return from the fight near the valley. The rains took our shelter. We walked for 2 days. No one would open their door." Her voice broke slightly and she turned her face away. Samuel felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had known loss too. He knew what it did to a soul. He nodded slowly. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "There's hay in the barn and blankets by the wall. It ain't much, but it's dry and safe." The women looked at each other, their relief clear in their eyes. They thanked him again, and together they moved toward the barn. Samuel stood at the door, watching them disappear into the night, then closed it gently behind them. The cabin felt even quieter after that, but the quiet no longer felt lonely. It felt alive somehow. That night Samuel didn't sleep much. The sound of the wind mixed with faint whispers from the barn. He kept thinking about those women, how far they must have walked, how heavy their loss must be. He thought about his own wife, Mary, and how she used to hum softly when the wind grew strong. He turned on his side and closed his eyes, but sleep only came after the first light of dawn crept across the floor. The next morning, he found them already awake. They were outside, tending to the small corral where his few remaining cattle stood. One of them was patching a fence with her bare hands, another was sweeping the porch, and a third was carrying water from the well. He stopped on the steps and just watched. No one had touched this place in years. Seeing someone work there felt like seeing spring arrive early. "You don't have to do all that," he said finally. Naya turned and smiled faintly. "We are used to working," she replied. "We wish to help," Samuel nodded. He didn't argue. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and joined them. The morning passed quietly, with only the sound of hammering, sweeping, and the occasional soft laughter from the younger women. By noon, the ranch looked different. It looked like someone cared for it again. Later that day, Samuel brought out some old tools and offered to mend their shoes. They watched as he worked, his hands steady and skilled. One of the women, a gentle-faced widow named Tala, sat nearby and told him about the river, how it once sang with life before the storm destroyed their camp. Her words carried both sadness and peace. Samuel listened without interrupting. He hadn't heard anyone speak so calmly in a long time. When evening came, the women prepared a simple meal from what little there was, beans, cornmeal, and wild herbs they'd found by the ridge. They invited Samuel to eat with them. The food was plain, but it tasted better than anything he remembered. As they sat together around the fire, the silence between them changed. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was something warmer. After the meal, one of the younger widows brought out a small flute she had carried in her bundle. She played a soft tune, something old and haunting. The notes floated through the cabin like smoke, weaving into the firelight and wrapping around their tired hearts. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the sound carry him somewhere far away, back to the days when laughter filled his home. When the song ended, no one spoke for a while. Then Samuel said quietly, "You can stay here until you find somewhere else. There's plenty of work to be done. I could use the help." The women exchanged looks, their eyes shining. Naya gave a slow nod. "We will work. We will not be a burden." From that night on, the ranch was no longer silent. Each day brought small changes. The fences were fixed. The barn roof stopped leaking. The fields began to breathe again. Samuel found himself waking up earlier, feeling stronger. He didn't say much, but he noticed everything. The way they sang softly while they worked. The way the sun touched their faces. The way the air felt lighter when they laughed. As the days turned into weeks, something in him began to heal. The loneliness that had clung to his heart started to fade. He realized that his home, once a place of grief, had become a place of life again. The 5 widows had brought something no storm could wash away: hope. But far beyond the hills, word had begun to spread. Some of the neighboring ranchers had seen the women working on his land. They whispered among themselves, not kindly. Samuel didn't know it yet, but trouble was coming. The peace he had found was fragile, and soon he would have to stand for it. The days rolled into weeks, and the ranch that once looked like a graveyard of dust and silence began to breathe again. Samuel woke each morning to the sound of the windmill creaking and the soft chatter of the 5 women outside. They worked without complaint. They gathered water, fed the animals, cleaned the barn, and mended the fences. Sometimes they sang in their own tongue, soft and low, like prayers carried by the wind. Samuel didn't always understand the words, but he understood the feeling behind them: peace, gratitude, and healing. He often watched them from the porch as the sun rose over the far hills. They moved together, always helping one another, never wasting words or steps. They reminded him of his wife Mary, of how she used to bring life into every corner of this place. Slowly, the emptiness in him began to fill with something new. But word spreads fast in the West, and the nearby settlers began to talk. They didn't like what they heard. "A white rancher living with 5 Apache widows," they whispered at the trading post. "It ain't proper." Others said worse things. Some laughed, some frowned, and some promised to set things straight. Samuel didn't hear much of it himself at first. He didn't visit town often. He preferred the quiet of his land, where work kept him honest and the widows kept his heart steady. One afternoon, Naya came to him while he was chopping wood. "There were men by the stream," she said softly. "They looked at us. They said words we did not understand." Her tone carried worry. Samuel stopped his axe mid-swing and looked at her. "Don't mind them," he said at first. But when he saw fear in her eyes, he set the axe down. "You're safe here," he added firmly. "No one's going to harm you while I'm breathing." That night, Samuel sat on the porch long after the sun went down. The stars above him burned cold and bright, and the wind carried the far-off cry of a coyote. He knew the world out there didn't forgive easily. It judged quickly and harshly, but he also knew what was right. Those women weren't trespassers or troublemakers. They were survivors, and they had given him back his will to live. The next morning, a wagon rolled up the dirt road. It was Tom Weller, an old neighbor who owned the next ranch over. Samuel hadn't seen him in months. Tom climbed down from his wagon, his eyes scanning the property. "Heard you got company," he said flatly. 5 Apache women, is it?" Samuel nodded. "That's right. They're helping out around here." Tom frowned. "Helping out?" "Sam, you gone soft? You don't know what folks are saying down at the post. They think you're losing your mind." Samuel's face didn't change. Let them talk. Tom stepped closer. You think they'll stop at talk? People don't take kindly to what they don't understand. They'll come here. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Samuel crossed his arms. Then I'll be ready. Tom shook his head. You always were too stubborn. He turned, climbed back into his wagon, and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind. When the wagon disappeared over the ridge, Samuel looked back toward the barn. The widows were there, working quietly. He didn't tell them what Tom said. He didn't want fear to steal the peace they had found. That evening, as the sun sank and painted the sky with fire, Samuel gathered the women around the fire pit. If anyone comes asking questions, he said gently, you stay inside. Don't open the door. I'll handle it. Naya met his gaze. You have helped us more than anyone, she said softly. We will not leave you. He gave a faint smile. And I won't leave you either. That night, as darkness settled deep, the sound of horses echoed down the road. Samuel stood, lantern in hand, watching as 3 riders appeared out of the night. They stopped near the fence, dismounted, and approached. The tallest of them spoke. Evening, Sam. We heard you've taken in savages. Samuel's grip on the lantern tightened, but his voice stayed calm. I've taken in 5 women who lost everything. They've done nothing wrong. The man spat on the ground. You're making the rest of us look bad, Sam. Ain't right mixing with their kind. Folks are saying they should be sent back where they belong. They belong where they're safe, Samuel said. His tone didn't rise, but it carried weight. And that's here. One of the other men stepped forward. You always were a fool for lost causes. Samuel's eyes didn't leave theirs. Then maybe the world needs more fools. For a long moment, no one moved. The night air was thick. Then the men turned, muttering to each other, and rode off into the darkness. Samuel stayed outside until the sound of their horses faded completely. When he went back inside, the widows were standing near the doorway. Naya's eyes were wet with tears she didn't try to hide. They will come again, she whispered. Maybe, Samuel said softly. But I'll still be here. From that night onward, something changed between them. They began to share more of their lives, more of their stories. Around the fire each evening, Samuel listened as they spoke about their husbands, their children, their lost homes. In return, he told them about Mary, about the drought, about the years of silence that had nearly swallowed him whole. Through the stories, they built a bridge between their worlds. It was quiet, unspoken, but strong. Weeks passed. The spring rains came early that year, soaking the fields and filling the stream again. The widows planted small patches of corn and beans near the cabin. They worked side by side with Samuel, laughing softly when he stumbled over their words, smiling when he finally said something right. Life, for the first time in years, felt like it was moving forward. One morning, Samuel woke to find a basket at his door. Inside was a loaf of bread, still warm, and a note written in rough handwriting. You did right. Some of us know it. It wasn't signed. He smiled to himself and left the bread untouched until everyone was awake. When they shared it later that day, it felt like more than food. It felt like hope returning from the edge of the desert. The months went by, and the talk in town slowly faded. People had their own troubles, their own crops to worry about, and word began to spread that Samuel Hart's ranch had started to flourish again. His cattle were healthy, his fences strong, his crops green. Some said it was luck. Others whispered it was the women, those Apache widows with healing hands. By the time summer came, Samuel's ranch had become something rare in that dry land, a place of peace. Travelers stopped by and found food, water, and kindness. The widows always shared what they had, no matter how little. Samuel never turned anyone away. Together they built a small piece of good in a world that often forgot what goodness looked like. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Samuel stood by the porch with Naya beside him. The wind was warm and the air smelled of rain and earth. Funny, he said quietly. I thought I'd die alone out here. Naya looked at him, her eyes soft. No one who opens their heart is ever alone, she said. He didn't reply right away. He just looked at the horizon where the light met the hills. Then he nodded slowly. You all gave me back something I'd lost a long time ago. What is that? She asked. Life, he said simply. The last light of day faded, and the stars began to appear, one by one. From inside the cabin came the sound of laughter, soft, warm, and full of peace. For the first time in many years, Samuel Hart smiled without pain in his heart. The 5 widows had knocked on his door with nothing but sorrow in their eyes. But when they entered, they brought with them something far greater than need. They brought faith, kindness, and the quiet strength to begin again. And out on that lonely stretch of Wild West land, the man who thought his story was ending found that it was only just beginning.